Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new, welcome. My name is Adelina and I make videos about living in this tiny house on wheels and living a more intentional life. Today I thought I would do a little Q&A. I got some good questions from one of my, actually I don't think he's a viewer. I think his question came from Facebook, but for Don C, these are the answers to the questions that you sent me. Don reached out and asked me if I wouldn't mind answering a few questions just based on my experience. I'm not an expert, but I thought that what I would do is to, oh, Sophie's out. You stay on the steps here. I have tried putting a harness on her and she does not like it at all. She goes a little squirrely actually, but I do think that a harness would be good for her. I just have to find one that works with her girth because she manages to squirm out of it because she's got this great big belly and this tiny little neck, and she manages to get it off. I don't know. So I am on the search for a good harness for a cat that is on the plumper side of things. Anyways, back to the video. So I thought I would answer the questions that Don asked because I think they're really good questions. I hope you can hear me well enough. The neighbor has their AC on, which I totally understand. It's a warm day here today, not smoking hot, but warmish. So, but I think with the mic, you can probably hear me okay. So let's get to the first question. So Don's first question is a topic that I actually did make a video on recently, and I will link that down below. His question is, would I say that living in a tiny house is better than living in the equivalent priced RV? Actually, that is a good question because he specifically asks do I think it's better than the equivalent price of an RV? So that's different because obviously they come in different prices. So if I was to No, you stay up here. If I was to answer that question, it would just be my opinion. Because the answer, as with so many things in life, and I've said this before multiple times, is it depends on your needs. But for me, would I say that, you know, an RV of the equivalent price of the tiny house, which is roughly about 150,000 Canadian when I built it, or just under, which do I think is better? Again, just my opinion. I think that the tiny house is better. And here's why. You can get some beautiful RVs and you can spend an awful lot of money on them. But you're still working with the traditional RV framing and the limitations that come along with that and the type of materials that are used in RVs. It's really hard to say one's better than the other. Again, this is just my opinion, but an RV is meant to be light. It's meant to be moved a lot. For me, that wasn't a consideration. So I prefer to have the 2x4 walls, the 2x6 ceiling and floor, the spray foam insulation, sort of the same sort of building materials, cabinets and everything that a traditional foundation built house has, so that my house just feels more sturdy. But I traded that off. I traded off the lightness, the maneuverability that you get with an RV. So for me, the equivalent price of an RV would have been beautiful. There are some gorgeous RVs in that price point, but I still prefer the tiny house because it's more of it feels like more of a house versus an RV. You're always feeling like you're in an RV. But that's my answer to that question. I'm moving over so you can see Sophie, who just wants to lay in the shade. Okay, so Don's second question was, how did I determine the size, square footage of the house that suited me? That is a really good question. I think it comes down to 5 things. So I took into account my lifestyle, how I like to live, the fact that I love to cook, I love to have my kids over. I don't like to host large gatherings, but I do like to have friends over one-on-one, and definitely my kids, and I really like to cook. So that was important. And I knew that this was going to be my house for a very long time, if not my forever house. So I took that into consideration when I was choosing a gooseneck trailer so that I could have my bedroom up on the gooseneck and not have to climb into a loft to go to bed every night. So you definitely want to take into consideration your lifestyle, your specific physical needs when you're deciding on the size of your tiny house and sort of the layout. Also, you want to take into account how many people are living in that tiny house. For me, it was just going to be me and Sophie for now. Maybe somebody else in the future, maybe a puppy in the future, who knows? But I knew that it wasn't going to be for a family. There was going to be one person living there. So you want to take that into consideration. That definitely factored into when I was deciding on the size. Also, I work from home. Before the pandemonium, I worked from home 3 days a week in my old townhouse. And during the pandemonium, I was made a full-time teleworker. So when I was building my tiny house, because the goal was always to be a full-time teleworker, no, back up there, back the bus up. The goal was always to be a full-time teleworker. I knew that I wanted a home office in my tiny house. I did not want to have my computer, my laptop, all my stuff out on the counter. It was important for me to build in a dedicated workspace so that I had a place to store everything and tuck things away. And I definitely wanted there to be separation between my work day and my personal day. So that was a factor when I was considering the size of the tiny house, because obviously that meant that it had to be a little bit bigger, or at least I had to dedicate a certain amount, a significant amount of the space, given the size of the house, to that goal, that need. Also, I took into account how often am I moving this tiny house, because I don't intend to move it very often. It'll move maybe a handful, maybe 5 times in its lifetime. I knew that I could go a little bit bigger because I wasn't moving it all the time. If I was planning on traveling with the tiny house, moving it on a regular basis, then I would have definitely gone smaller than I did, because the size of the tiny house, because she's the size she is, requires a substantial vehicle to move it, and little dandelion fuzz. It requires a professional to move it, because I'm not qualified to move something of this size. Because I knew I wasn't moving on a regular basis, I knew I could go bigger and have more space, which is what I wanted. So always take that into account. Are you going to move? How often are you going to move it? And then I think number 5 would be think about whether or not you plan to be on grid or off grid. I am on grid right now, and I didn't build in anything that would allow me to be off grid, other than the fact that right now I'm hooked to natural gas because I have to be tied into city utilities to be parked here in Calgary. But down the road, I can switch the furnace and the stove back to natural gas, or back to propane. That's super easy to do. So I could be technically off grid that way, in that I could run those things off of propane. But I don't have solar panels. I don't have a water tank, freshwater tank, and I don't have a gray or black water tank in the tiny house. If you're going to be off-grid, you're going to need room for those things. You're going to need room for the water tanks, the gray water tank, the freshwater tank, and you're going to need room for batteries that you will have to have in order to have your solar array hooked up to it. So that will determine the size of your tiny house. That's just 5 things that came to mind right away that were considerations for me when it came to my size of my tiny house. I think I would add a 6th in there, and that would be your budget. That will definitely determine the size of your tiny house, because I was selling my townhouse to build this, and I could afford to build the size that I wanted. I could afford to build a slightly bigger size. The gooseneck trailer was more expensive. Going the size that I did was more expensive. Having all the windows that I have was more expensive. All of those things factored in. So obviously, I think fundamentally your budget is going to be a big driver of the size that you choose for your tiny house. His third question was, can one have a house built to your own specifications, or is there a specific sort of size for CSA certification, Canadian Standards Association? That's certification here in Canada. I'm not sure if that's the same in the US, and certainly other parts of the world will have different certification acronyms. But his question is, can you build any size you want? Yes, you can build any size you want. And it can still, because the CSA certification is a safety thing. It's means that it's built to code, it's built to a certain building standard, and it is inspected along the way. It doesn't specify what size of home you can build. That's up to you. But keep in mind that the size you build will impact your ability to move it and where you can park it. So that comes into play, but it's not necessarily tied to CSA certification. I will add the proviso, just again, that I am not an expert, and I am giving you my best information that I have based on my experience and my research. I could be totally wrong. If I've got that wrong, please kindly put it down in the show notes where I've gone wrong, and provide the accurate information in a kind way, because we're all doing the best here that we can. As far as I know, CSA certification doesn't determine the size of house that you can build, but it does determine it's tied to how things are built and what codes are used, and how things are inspected along the way. The fourth question was, what is the maximum width and ceiling height for a tiny house? And that is also a question that I have answered in past videos, but let me give you the specs on my house. My house is 9.5 feet wide, outside measurements, and 37 feet long from the front of the gooseneck to the back here where the living room is. And when it's on its tires, it's 13.5 feet from the ground level to the highest peak of the house. I am going to look at my notes here because I want to get it right. So I live in Alberta, Canada, and as of the date that I looked at this, which was November of last year, I can't imagine that anything has changed. The specifications, the rules are that for it to be street legal, without a permits, it can't be any wider than 8.5 feet wide. It can't be any higher than 13 feet 6 inches from the ground level to the highest point, and it can't be any longer than, I think, than 60 feet, 65 feet. But the biggest restriction is in the width and the height. You can build a tiny house that's wider than 8.5 feet long. If you build it wider, then you will need a permit to move it. In Alberta, anything over 10 feet requires signage, the big D that says wide load or oversized, some sort of signage, front and back. Up until 10 feet, between 8.5 feet and 10 feet, you need a permit, but it doesn't necessarily need the wide load signage. But from over 10 feet, you do. Over 12 feet at 7 inches, you're going to need one escort vehicle. And over 14 feet, 6 inches, you're going to need 2 escort vehicles, one in front and one in back. So those are the rules here in Alberta. They will be different in different provinces. I think across Alberta, or across Canada, they don't vary a ton, but there are some variations. And certainly in different parts of North America, different parts of the world, they will be slightly different. For British Columbia, anything over 8 feet at 8.5 feet requires a permit. Over 10.5 feet, you need signage front and back. And over 10.5 feet, you need one escort. Over 12.5 feet, you need 2 escort vehicles. So again, slightly different than Alberta, and we are neighboring provinces. One thing to keep in mind is that the height doesn't vary when it comes to province. It seems to be pretty standard that no higher than 13 feet 6 inches. And that is because of bridge height. You don't want to hit a bridge when your house is being moved, so you want to make sure that you're keeping to 13.5 feet or lower. You can build a house that's taller, absolutely. And I have seen some builders who do build taller tiny houses. Nelson Tiny Homes in British Columbia, for example, they will keep the roof, the final roof off, and just put a temporary roof on to transport it so it stays under that limit. And then when it is on its permanent, like its forever site, then they will actually put the other roof on. So they can have a higher roof line and higher ceiling height inside, but for transport, they still have to take it down to that height. So that's what I would say about the max height and width. It varies. There isn't necessarily a max, well, there is a max width, but the widths and the permitting for moving it varies from province to province, country to country. So you want to be sure that you are checking the rules in the location that you're building and the location that you're moving your house to. It would really suck to build in one state or one province or one part of your country where they allow certain things and then decide that you want to move it to a different part where that isn't allowed. So do your research, figure out where you are now and what are the rules, and look, sort of think ahead to where you might want to end up being and look at the rules there. Dawn's final question was, can I recommend a tiny house builder? Yes, I can. However, please know that I have not met every builder. I don't know every builder. I don't know even what builders exist. I only know the ones that I have met and whose houses I've seen, and certainly my builder. So I'm going to give you 3 that I recommend, and they are all in Western Canada. There's a lot of amazing builders throughout Canada, throughout North America, and obviously if you live in Europe, other parts of the world, whatever country you're living in, there will be tiny house builders there. So I'll give you my recommendations, and then I will give you a little some guidelines when you're choosing your builder. So my builder is Teacup Tiny Homes in Lethbridge, Alberta. Jen McCarthy is the owner, and she is amazing. I had a fantastic experience when I was building my tiny house, and I have heard of a lot of people who haven't had good experiences when they've been building both foundation houses and tiny houses. So I was very lucky, and I will use lucky in quotation marks because I did do my research. So the thing I love about Jen and her team is that everybody there is really passionate about tiny houses, and the 3 builders that I'm going to recommend, that is pretty much unanimous all around. Jen's team is fantastic. I love every one of them. I had a fantastic experience. She was very responsive to my needs. She asked all the right questions when it came to my lifestyle and what I needed. And we worked on my design together. I came with a very definite idea of what I wanted. And a lot of pictures of tiny houses where I like this and I like that. And again, some very definite must-haves. The 3 main ones were, I wanted a big kitchen, I wanted a dedicated home office space, and I wanted a bedroom I could stand in. And then everything else I was negotiable on. She really listened to that. She really got a feel for my personality. And then it wasn't sort of a 1 floor plan and done. She showed me the first version of the floor plan, and then we tweaked it based on our discussions because she wanted to get it right. So I have nothing but absolute 100% recommendation for Teacup Tiny Homes in Lethbridge. They build and deliver all across Canada and into the US. So it doesn't really matter where you live. You can work with them if you want to. And they build really good quality houses. I'm coming on to 3 years living in my tiny house on wheels. There have been a few things that I've had to fix and deal with, but that happens no matter what house you're living in. And I have been steadily impressed with the quality of my tiny house. So I would definitely recommend them. The second tiny house builder that I would recommend is Fritz Tiny Houses in Edmonton, Alberta. Now, I have not built with them, but I have met them and I have seen their builds. Again, it's the kind of company that really takes pride in the homes that they build. They really make a concerted effort to build the tiny house that works for their clients and their clients' unique needs. So it's not the same house over and over and over again, which I really love to see. They have beautiful workmanship and beautiful homes. And again, I would recommend them. The third builder that I'm going to recommend is not in Alberta. The builder is Nelson Tiny Homes in Nelson, British Columbia. When I was looking to build my tiny house, I interviewed multiple builders and actually went out to Nelson and drove out there and toured some of their houses and met Seth, who is the owner, and just got a really good feel for them and their houses. They have a YouTube channel, which is awesome. So I was able to see their houses on video, but there's nothing like actually going and seeing one in person. And he is exactly exactly how you imagine he is when you see him on video. That's what he's like in real life. Really down to earth, passionate about what they do, and their homes are so unique and so beautifully crafted, and I just love them. When I met him and when I toured the houses, they didn't build to CSA certification. They do now. So all three of the builders that I've recommended, Teacup Tiny Homes in Lethbridge, Alberta, Fritz Tiny Homes in Edmonton, Alberta, and Nelson Tiny Homes in Nelson, British Columbia, all three do build CSA certified homes. So if that is important to you, and it is definitely something to consider when you want to give yourself the most options for parking your tiny house, then you can definitely have your house built to CSA certification standards with all three of those builders. So what is my advice for choosing a tiny house builder? Because there are lots of other tiny house builders that are amazing. There's Minimalist Tiny Homes in Quebec. There is Mint Tiny Homes in British Columbia, Rewild. There's so many builders now that have been building for a while. So not brand new, just built one or two houses. Those have all been building for a while. I just have never met them and never toured any of their houses, so I can't say to you that I recommend them, but I think they're awesome. And I'm sure that if I did meet them and did tour their houses, I would be recommending them nonstop. Minimalist Tiny Houses in Quebec makes the most gorgeous tiny houses, and I just one of these days hope that I can get out there. In fact, anywhere east, if I go visit family in Toronto, I am definitely taking a road trip out there to meet them and tour their houses. But as it stands right now, I haven't, but they're awesome. So my advice to you when you're choosing a tiny house builder, whether somebody recommends them or not, I mean, obviously a recommendation is a great place to start. Somebody that you trust recommends a builder that they've used. That's really a good sign. But meet with them in person. Spend some time talking to them. Walk through their shop. See some of their builds that are in progress so you can get an idea of how they build. Then I would definitely ask for references. You want to talk to some people who are living in their tiny houses that builder has built and have been for a little while. So they have a really good feeling of how that house was built. And then ultimately, you have to trust your instincts, right? One of the reasons that I went with Jen and Teacup after having met multiple builders that I really liked was because Jen was as excited about my tiny house, about my build, as I was. Now, she builds multiple houses in a year, but this was the only house I've ever built and will likely ever build. So for me, this was a big deal. And I never once got the feeling that it wasn't a big deal for her. And that's really cool. So I would say that that's probably the most important thing, that your builder is excited about your build, that they have that energy, because if they don't, then you're never going to feel like a priority to them, and you're never going to feel like your house is special to them. And I think it should be, because this is your home. So those are the questions that Dawn C. asked. I hope I've answered them for you properly, sufficiently, Dawn, because they're good questions. And each of them was slightly unique, even though I've talked about those topics in other videos. Your questions had a slight twist, which I thought made them worthwhile answering in a separate video. So guys, I hope you're doing okay. I hope you are starting to have some beautiful weather like we are finally, even though it's supposed to start raining tonight and rain for the rest of the week. But shh, we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to enjoy this glorious weather while we can. Sophie is obviously loving it. Can't leave her out here alone because I'm worried that she will make a run for it. Or one of the Casanova cats in the neighborhood will come over and say hello. But there's bird feeders right behind the camera, which she just loves to watch. She never seems to want to chase the birds, but she's like me. She just likes to lay back and watch the world go by. So I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you're staying safe. Remember, in a world where you can be anything, be kind. I love you guys, and I'll see you next Sunday.